Now, moving on to the speed reading techniques. We're going to talk about some fundamental techniques to begin with, and then we're going to go through them, explain them, and give some bonus methods so you guys can master speed reading. So we have the scanning motion training, timing, subvocalizing, using a pointer, rereading and pre-reading, limit distractions, and skimming main points. Starting off with the scanning motion training. What the scanning motion training is all about is you training your eye movement, working on proper eye movement for speed reading. The goal is to train your peripheral vision. You need to be able to move from reading one word at a time to reading one line at a time. And it basically involves looking at the center of the line and using your peripheral vision to read the rest of the line. So if you do the entire page like that, you just use your peripheral vision on every single line, you'll find out that you finish the page really quickly while understanding everything on it. The goal is for you to eventually develop this peripheral vision to be able to read phrases instead of words, and this will make the process, of course, faster. It will also help with the third fundamental technique that we're going to get to, which is subvocalizing, but we'll get to it in a few. Now I want to talk about timing, and we did mention that before. One of the best methods to develop speed reading is to time it. Put a timer for 1 minute and see how many words can you read. Every single week, do it once and track the progress. This will ensure positive self-pressure on yourself, which can push you to new boundaries and help you in your journey to be able to develop these speed reading mechanisms. And there's going to be a lot of different exercises throughout the course that can help you with the speed reading. So don't worry if I go through any of the fundamental techniques without mentioning exercises that you can do to work on it, because they're going to be included in the course. So for the scanning motion training, there will be a lecture about vision, peripheral vision training. So no worries. All the different points that we have, there are going to be practice examples for them for you to be able to master them properly. Some of them will not have exercising material. So for example, like timing, you don't need exercises. You just need to make sure that you're doing your timing right. Time it for 1 minute. How many words can you read, and keep repeating every single week. So for those that have exercises, they will be included. For those that don't have exercises, it will be enough to follow the instructions and the information that I'm giving while talking about it. Now we move to subvocalization. It is basically you repeating what you're reading inside. It's an inner monologue. You're talking to yourself. And this is extremely common among readers. You speak the words as you are reading them, whether you're speaking them out loud or you're speaking them inside your head. And this is one of the biggest obstacles when it comes to speed reading. Now, what's really interesting is that the average reading speed that a person has is almost the same as the talking speed. So if you can read 300 words per minute, you can probably just say 300 words per minute. And this is where one of the limitations would come in, and you'll be able to notice it really quickly. When you're reading, you will notice that you have a voice inside your head, most of the times, repeating what you're reading. And unless you're Eminem singing the verse in Rap God that is extremely fast, all the time, you will not be able to read in a speed that you desire, until you overcome the subvocalization and the inner monologue. How fast can you speak and make sense and comprehension out of what you're saying? And this is usually similar to your reading speed. Now, when your reading speed gets better, your talking speed doesn't get any better, because what we're doing is we're limiting the inner monologue, we're limiting the subvocalization, and we're focusing on reading without vocalizing. This is a habit that traces back to school, When teachers used to read texts or somebody used to read something and we would follow the text while they're reading it, this is what had the bad impact on it. This is what had this habit established in our minds. And now, whenever we want to read something, we think that it is essential to subvocalize, otherwise we can't really comprehend it. And what you basically need is something to block this inner voice in your head that is repeating every single thing you're reading. And the best way to do so, from my personal experience and from many different references, is using music. But not any type of music. You don't want to listen to heavy metal or R&B where there's a lot of rap lyrics. You need to listen to music, instrumental music. Binaural beats are also a suggestion. For those of you who don't know, binaural beats are like auditory brainstem responses that would originate in inside the brain's hemisphere. There are different auditory impulses that comes out of them. And when you listen to binaural beats or you listen to classical music, instrumentals that would keep your mind busy, that would keep your mind between the ears from thinking and analyzing and subvocalizing everything you're reading, you will be able to, of course to a certain extent, control the subvocalizing system, and then you'll find yourself reading faster and faster and faster. And once you know how to avoid subvocalizing, you'll not be reading every single word. You might read and subvocalize words that are new, words that are new to your vocabulary that you haven't heard about or read before. And this is normal, this is fair. Reading words that you see every single day, like and, but, more, normal, again, against, words that you're really familiar with, you'll be able to read them without subvocalizing. But you might encounter some words that are formed by a lot of different letters, or some words that are new to your vocabulary, and you might want to stop and subvocalize it to be able to comprehend it properly. When you do subvocalize it, and of course you need to understand it, you can add this to your vocabulary. One day you might use this word. And I'm not saying if you do this you'll memorize every single word, but you will be able to memorize and get some more out of your vocabulary. Moving on, there's also one of the fundamental techniques, which is using a pointer. When looking at a page that is white with words written in black, lines piled up one on top of the other, and a lot of the times you're going to have pages where there's not a lot of space, there's not a lot of different paragraphs. Sometimes you might have 2 or 3 paragraphs, one after the other, spread over 10, 15 pages. And it's very easy to lose where you're at. Whether you're using your peripheral vision and you're reading one line at a time, or you're not and you're moving your eyes, you have this eye movement that's going from the beginning of the phrase to the end of it and going down and up again. Sometimes you might not know where you are exactly, especially if there was something that caught your attention for 1 second, something that made you lose concentration for 1 second. It will slow you down. And most people, by the time they find where they were before, they need to read a bit before to be able to follow the idea and link it all together properly. So using a pointer would help you avoid this problem. Again, even if you are using your peripheral vision, at first, when you're still not at that level, you might be reading with regular eye movement. You use the pointer going with you from the left to the right, down and then all the way up when you get to the second page. You make sure that the pointer is following you, not as you are subvocalizing. And this is really crucial. You don't want to use the pointer to subvocalize. It's not that once the pointer is at this word, I need to read this word. The pointer needs to just be something that is that has this swift pace of moving around while you're reading the words in your mind's eye without subvocalizing. And once you use the pointer and you have music, instrumental music that you're listening to, you'll be automatically helping yourself in avoiding subvocalizing. especially when you start moving the pointer at the speeds that your eyes can follow and not your brain. And when I say brain, I'm not talking about comprehension, I am talking about subvocalizing. Because the comprehension of the thoughts is coming from a different source. It's coming from these information emitting light, hitting your retina, and then the analysis is happening through your vision and not through your brain. The primary source of analysis that's taking place is going through the nervous system, through the retina, through your eyes, what you're reading. So when you move the pointer in a pace where you don't have the time to subvocalize, and adding to that the instrumental music or whatever you're listening to, you will be helping yourself. A lot of people, they don't feel comfortable listening to any kind of music while they are reading. And in that case, using a pointer can also help a lot when it comes to subvocalizing, because if the pen is moving, or of course any pointer you want, it doesn't have to be a pen. If the pointer is moving at such a speed that your mind cannot subvocalize what's going on and what's going right in front of the pointer, but your eyes can keep up, and therefore your mind, your analysis that's going on in your mind, your nervous system can take place, subvocalizing will be limited and it will be put aside until you face something that you're not familiar with or something that is complex and complicated. If you are using some study material, not just like a regular book, you're reading a math theory, for example, and then you get to the formula. You can probably read through the theory very easily because it's made up out of words that you are familiar with, but then you get to the formula and then you might notice that you are subvocalizing. E equals mc squared. Maybe when you read the explanation of the formula, you read it while using the speed reading mechanisms, but then you get to the formula and you start subvocalizing because E equals mc squared. Your mind is analyzing the formula. This simple formula has an entire text behind it. So don't freak out and don't start to sweat over subvocalizing some things, because sometimes it is essential and crucial. When the material is fresh, when the material is complex, subvocalizing can help a lot. So I would recommend that you do use the speed reading mechanisms and methods most of the times, but when you have something complex like physics or math, you don't want to speed read. You need to know what you're doing. Speed reading would help you avoid details in books that are unnecessary. If you're reading a book about finance, or you're reading a book about personal development. But if you're going through physical theories and math formulas and equations that needs a lot of thinking and a lot of mental and cognitive energy, it's better to avoid or limit the speed reading mechanism. Now, a lot of people, when they do use the pointer method, they can't help it but read every word they are pointing at. It might even get to a point where they are subvocalizing and reading at a very, very high speed that they're not actually subvocalizing, they're barely subvocalizing the words. And the reason why this is happening is because they are used to it. It's a habit. Ever since we were kids, teachers in school would point out at a word and we would say it, we would pronounce it. They would point out at something they want to read, or they would point out at something they want us to read. When they write something, when they write a long paragraph or a phrase on the board, they would usually follow it through with a pointer while they're reading it, or point at it with their hand and point at it while they're reading it, basically. And through neuroplasticity, what became wired in our brain is when we're pointing at a word, when we're pointing at stuff, we're reading. We're not just reading in our mind's eye, we're subvocalizing. Most kids are not aware of this at their young age, of course, but when a teacher writes a phrase on the board and they're pointing at it and they're reading it while they are pointing at it, even though the students are not reading it with him or her, you are subvocalizing it with him or her. And it becomes a habit. And when it does become a habit, through neuroplasticity, it's going to become something that you can't easily avoid. And the last thing that using a pointer can help you with is what's coming next, is to avoid rereading and ensure pre-reading. A lot of people have this habit of rereading phrases, even paragraphs, because they thought that they didn't really understand it well, or they got distracted for a couple seconds and then they just need to figure out the link again. But people reread a lot. There aren't any stable and fixed statistics about it, but most people, the majority of people, would admit to rereading at least once every time they're trying to read a book. And this especially happens to people who are reading on a regular basis. People who read every now and then have this tendency, have this difference actually. When you read every single day, the purpose is to get more information in. You want to learn faster, you want to read faster. And because it's a habit, sometimes it kind of becomes automatic and you just lose focus for a second. And that's when you need to go back to concentration. In fact, subvocalizing is very much installed in a proper way in our system, that even if you're not comprehending or focusing or concentrating on anything, you sometimes find yourself while reading thinking about something entirely different. But you notice that you just read 5 lines, 5 phrases, and you have no idea what they talk about. But you are aware that you read them. You are aware that you subvocalized them. Don't try to do it consciously. You cannot do it consciously. When we're talking on a conscious level, we can only do one thing at a time. We can only focus on one thing at a time. If I asked you right now to think about an orange, and while thinking about the orange, keeping the orange in mind, thinking also about something completely different, it is biologically impossible. The human brain can focus on one thing at a time. And I'm not talking about multitasking. I'm talking more in a sense that if I ask you to close your eyes and focus on your breathing, and at the same time you're focusing on your breathing, I want you to pinch yourself in the leg and feel the pain. Be conscious of the pain and be conscious of the breathing at the same time. You will not be able to do it. So how come people are able to think about something else completely different and be conscious and deeply thinking about something while they are running through the paragraphs, running through the lines and the words and the book and subvocalizing everything they're reading? Well, it's because of neuroplasticity, of course. Subvocalizing became a habit that is installed and wired in your brain. And every time you read, subvocalizing would happen automatically. And when a behavior transforms into an automatic behavior, which means a habit, you will see when we get to the section that where we're talking about habits, that it becomes automatic in a sense that your brain would stop working. You're not conscious about how you're driving anymore. After 2 years of driving, you just do it. You don't think about it. It becomes natural. It becomes subconscious. You're not conscious about it anymore. It's automatic. And that's exactly what's happening with subvocalizing. It is happening on a subconscious level. That's why consciously, you don't remember any of the information. You don't recall or memorize any of the information. You have no idea what it's about. But subconsciously, you are still able to subvocalize all of this and read it, even if you're not understanding anything out of it. So use a pointer to avoid rereading. But of course, you need to keep some kind of logic to it. If you're using the pointer to go super fast, that you are able to follow all the information with your eyes, but your comprehension is not that good, and you are using the pointer method to also avoid rereading, yeah, you might end up finishing the book in 2 to 3 days, but you'll probably not understand anything or comprehend or memorize anything from it. You want to use the pointer at a speed where you don't need rereading because you already got the information. You don't need rereading because the pointer is helping you stay focused. And that's the last advantage of using a pointer, is that when you're following the pointer, You're focusing more on the text because there's something pointing at it and you are deliberately following this pointer. When you just have the book open and you're holding it with both of your hands with no pointer whatsoever and just following it with your eyes, if your eyes got distracted for any reason, you will lose your focus and concentration. But when you're pointing, it'll be easier for you to keep the concentration flow going. Now, another thing that can help you when it comes to rereading is pre-reading. When you want to read a new book, you don't just want to pick it up, read the title, and start reading it. People avoid the introduction. People don't read the summary on the back. People don't read the author's biography. They don't read what other people said, what's basically on the book. These things that you avoid and you just get straight to the book, it's good. You're not wasting your time, but in fact you are. There's a huge difference between reading a book that you only know the title of and reading a book that you know the title, you know what the book is about, the big image, you know the summary, you know who the author is, what's his background, and what's his ideology. You'll be able to understand and know more because of what people said. When people say there are a lot of personal experiences that help a lot, then you know that personal experiences in the book are actually important. They taught people a lot. And also pre-reading chapters and the index. It's one thing to open a page and read the chapter, let's say an introduction to neurology, and just reading the entire chapter to realize that chapter 2 talks about the link between neurology and biology, and then get to chapter 3 where they talk about the link between neurology, biology, and neuroplasticity. But if, in another hypothetical case, you read the chapters and you saw that first we're going to talk about neurology, then we're going to talk about biology and neurology, and then we're going to link them up in the third chapter with neuroplasticity, to then be able to explain all the different situations and different mechanisms that are involved in the process of neuroplasticity. So instead of starting the book knowing nothing but the title, you will actually have a lot more information in your head before starting, which will make the process way easier. It will help you, especially with comprehension and retention. You will know what is important, and when you know that something is important, you will most probably link it to another pathway in the brain that says this information is more important than the others, and therefore you'll be able to memorize it more quickly, more effectively. Now, another thing that happens is that a lot of people, they start reading a book only to realize that they don't really like it. A lot of people, they buy books, a lot of them, and they never read them because they don't find them as actually interesting. And nobody just gets to the page 150 to realize that the book is boring. Usually, they realize that the book is boring after reading 10, 20, 30 pages. Even less, and you'll be able to tell if the book is interesting or not. Reading the 5 first pages of the book, you'll be able to instantly tell if this is something that you would read and follow through or not. People waste a lot of times reading books that they don't like only to stop after reading 30 to 40 pages, and they just drop it. And this could have been time invested in reading and analyzing and comprehending something that you actually want to learn, something that you actually want to read. So whether you went to the bookstore and bought a book, make sure to read the title, the summary, some information, whatever is on the covers, and the index, the chapters, and also try to read the first 3 to 4 or 5 pages maybe. If everything was good, then this is probably a book that you would love to read. Otherwise, if you read the summary and you're like, this is not really what I was expecting out of the book, or you read the first 4 pages and you're like, wow, this is really boring. The guy's way in writing is just not me. I can't read it. I find it boring. I find it unpleasant. Even though this is not a speed reading technique, this is something that would help you in the reading process. When you avoid wasting time, you are gaining time, and therefore you are speed reading. And I'll give a really quick example about a book related to neuroplasticity. The book is called The Brain That Changes Itself. Now, let's say you are somebody who knew nothing about neuroplasticity, you never heard about it before, and you read the title, The Brain That Changes Itself. You will think about a lot of different things. You can never be sure what this book is actually about, and most of the times, titles on books are made to sell and not to actually give you the information and give you the purpose behind the book. The 4-Hour Work Week, for example, the title, 4-Hour Work Week, is not just to explain that in the book the author will teach you how to and what mechanisms and processes and systems to use to save up a lot of times in the week, but to also get your attention to actually buy the book because you're doing the work of the week in 4 hours. Now, is it 100% accurate? No, it's not. It's not accurate. Of course it's not. It depends on each and every person, but the title is there to sell. So The Brain That Changes Itself. Okay. Then you read more. New York Times bestseller Norman Doidge, MD, as featured on PBS The Brain's Fitness program. Now you know that the author has a lot of credibility, which will give you more confidence in the author and his information. And then you read Stories of Personal Triumph from the Frontiers of Brain Science. Now you know that the author is going to put a lot of personal experiences and mix them up to make you understand brain science. And you now understand that The Brain That Changes Itself will talk about these personal experiences and the brain science to change the brain. And then there's a comment by the New York Times. The power of positive thinking finally gains scientific credibility. Mind-bending, miracle-making, reality-busting stuff straddles the gap between science and self-help. Now you also understand that one of the main things that the book is going to focus on is positive thinking backed up by science. You carry on to read the back of the book. And for those of you who are wondering where I'm reading this, I have the book myself, and you can also find it online and read what I'm reading. This is one of the books that I first read that opened my eyes on the concept of neuroplasticity, but I read a lot more books because this was not enough to make this course. This course is actually a mix of a lot of different books, articles, blogs, videos, lectures, and even courses that I took at school. But this book itself is The Brain That Changes Itself, is one of the most fascinating I've read. But moving on the back cover, Oliver Sacks wrote, "Fascinating. Doidge's book is a remarkable and hopeful portrait of the endless adaptability of the human brain." And then the text on the cover, "The discovery that our thoughts can change the structure and function of our brains even into old age is the most important breakthrough in neuroscience in 4 centuries. In this revolutionary look at the brain, best-selling author, psychiatrist, and psychoanalyst Norman Doidge, MD, introduces both the brilliant scientists championed this new science of neuroplasticity and the astonishing progress of the people whose lives they've transformed. Introducing principles we can all use, as well as a reviving collection of case histories. Stroke patients cured a woman with half a brain that had rewired itself to work as a whole, learning and emotional disorder overcome, IQs raised, and aging brains rejuvenated. That brain that changed itself has implications for all human beings, not to mention human culture, human learning, and human history." This was said by the New York Times. And then the Washington Post said, "Readers will want to read entire sections aloud and pass the book on to someone who can benefit from it. Links scientific experimentations with personal triumph in a way that inspires." The Chicago Tribune said, "Lucid and absolutely fascinating. Doidge explained with clarity, grace, and vividness. It satisfies in equal measure the mind and the heart." And lastly, "Phantoms in the Brain, Probing the Mysteries of Human Mind," the author of the book said, "Superb, brilliant, I devoured it." So if you pause for a second and we reflect the difference between just reading the title, the brain that changes itself, and not understanding anything, and then reading and understanding that the book is about personal experience mixed with brain science that can explain how our brain's physical and chemical structure can change through the power of our thoughts, and that we will see principles, we will see past experiences and examples, and scientifically based and proven methods and principles and examples that can help us change the brain itself, whether it's a physical or chemical structure, and adapt a lot of different things, including positive thinking that was mentioned on the cover. So now we know that it is a self-help book with some scientific explanations and experimentations into it. And by the way, even if you're getting the books online, if you're saying I can't go to the bookstore and buy a book because I want to buy it online, first off, the front and the back cover are usually included when you want to buy the book online. And more than that, websites like Amazon, for example, can give you a look inside the book. On Amazon, you can actually read through the book. You can read some pages, the first few pages or the last pages, and you can make sure that this is the right book for you and this is something that you would want to read. And now, moving on to the next fundamental technique, limiting distractions. There's nothing that can help you with speed reading as much as limiting distractions. One of the main things that would waste our time the most while we're speed reading and make us slow is distractions. And one of the main sources of distractions that we have is our cell phones, smartphones. The majority of people would get distracted by their smartphones while they are reading, whether your notifications are on or not. When you're reading with your eyes and you have your phone on your right or on your left and you have the book in your hand, as soon as you get a notification and your phone flashes, your eye will switch from the book to the phone. And even if you gather the willpower to not look at the phone, what's the purpose? If you're not going to look at the phone, why put the temptation right next to you, where it will be used to drain your willpower and limit your levels of concentration and focus? If you're expecting something important, an important phone call that you're getting, don't read. Because if it's that important that you have to keep your phone next to you, every single time you get a notification on your phone, you are gonna look at your phone to know if it's that thing you're waiting for or not. And it doesn't need an expert to tell you how many random notifications you'll get every hour that has nothing to do with the phone call or whatever you were waiting for. You gotta limit distractions to be able to focus on the reading properly, especially if you wanna do speed reading. If you're speed reading, you need your concentration, you need your focus, you need your attention. You cannot be distracted. So the next time you sit down and you're reading, try to figure out what are the things that are distracting you and make sure to eliminate these. One of the best ways to do it is to create and make a corner just for you for your reading. Pick a spot at your house or in your room where you can sit down away from your computer and your phone. You put everything on silent mode and you sit in this corner and you read. You don't get distracted. You limit all the distractions. There's nothing next to you that can distract you, and you just read with full concentration and focus. And lastly, skimming main points. This is a bit similar to pre-reading, but it's a bit more proficient. Skimming happens as you're reading, not before you're reading. The best way to do skimming is to, every single time you finish a chapter and you start a new one, you can use your skimming technique. You are basically going to be reading a text quickly to get a general idea of meaning around it. Sometimes chapters' titles would not really tell you what the chapter is about. How to Win Friends and Influence People has a chapter entitled How to Make People Hate You, if I'm not mistaken, something similar. Well, you understand that the chapter is talking about some things that if you do, it will make people hate you, but you don't really understand what's going on. And if you do skimming, you'll be able to understand a bit more what the chapter is about, which will eventually ensure more comprehension and retention when you are speed reading. So take some time to read over all the main points. Read the table of contents, read the subtitles, read the chapters, the index, and to understand what every chapter is about, and then do the skimming for each and every chapter as well, for each and every section. Skimming should not take more than 2, 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how big the chapter is. It is not a long process, it's a short and easy process. The goal is to just understand what the chapter is about to get the general idea. Using all of these different techniques can help you with the speed reading process. So, to recap quickly, for speed reading, you need to first focus on the scanning motion training, and there are going to be exercises in the course about how to enhance your peripheral vision and how to train your scanning motion. The goal is to develop proper eye movement for proper speed reading. You also need to make sure that you always got your timing, that you're always making sure and keeping track of the progress that's taking place, understanding subvocalizing and learning how to avoid it, using a pointer. A pointer, as we said, can be a stick, can be a pen, or it can be, for example, a card. When you get to a point where your peripheral vision is developed, you might not want to be using a pointer to follow the entire line. You might just be using a card and just going down, 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 and then up on the next page. You're pointing at phrases, entire phrases, instead of groups of words. And to get to a point where you overcome subvocalizing and you can actually use your peripheral vision to read the entire phrase, using a card as a pointer can be really helpful because it's going to enhance the motor and sensory output system and ensure, of course, that the neuroplasticity is working effectively because you are using the total immersion method that we talked about in the learning strategies. You are blocking the possibility of subvocalizing, whether it's by using this method or by using all the other methods that we talked about, using a pointer and following the phrase, using music, and all the other techniques that we talked about. These are basically there to block subvocalizing. Also, rereading and how we should avoid it, pre-reading and how it's encouraged, how to limit the distractions and just avoid everything that can let you lose your focus, your attention, and your concentration, and finally, ensure proper skimming. After finishing the lecture, you might go and try reading, and you're going to realize that the fundamental methods are not as easy as you think they are. Even if you're using the methods to avoid subvocalizing, you will find yourself every now and then subvocalizing even on non-complex phrases and words and paragraphs and sections because you need time. Your brain is wired in a certain way and it needs time to be rewired in a way that ensures speed reading. So don't get frustrated and keep in mind that neuroplasticity is all about repetition. Neurons that fire together wire together, and the more you use them, the better the link between the neurons and the better the neural structure. And as this lecture is coming to an end, there are 2 bonus methods that I, from personal experience, will include in this course. These are methods that I found them to be very, very effective, especially when you're first starting off for the first technique, and for the use in school and when it comes to learning for the second technique. The first one is the audio-visual complementary assistive reading. Most of the books have audiobooks. And if you don't want to pay and buy the audiobook, because sometimes it's expensive to buy both the book and the audiobook, It's usually available online, whether on YouTube or on other websites, a lot of online resources. Most of the times you can find the book in an audio form. So the way this helps is you put your headphones and you put the audiobook, but double the speed. So you are blocking all the sub-vocalizing because you are hearing what the person is saying, but you are reading with your eyes at the same time. This will not only help you to avoid sub-vocalizing in the long run, but this can ensure very high levels of comprehension and retention because more senses are involved in the process, and the bonus part is that it's faster. You are increasing your comprehension, you are increasing your retention, and in the same time, you are increasing your speed in the reading process. So try to put the audiobook on double the speed, keep the pointer with you, and move along as the person is speaking. Move along and read with your eyes without sub-vocalizing. And the last method is the mind mapping speed reading technique. Later on in this course, you will understand the concept of mind mapping properly and how it works and how to apply it. We talked about it before, and you're going to see a lot more about it later. But just to understand the basics of it, mind mapping usually starts with a core idea, and then you have branches, which are details, and then sub-branches, which are details of the details. You can use mind mapping for speed reading to ensure comprehension in school. And we'll give neuroplasticity as a subject that is taught to you in school as an example to explain how the mind mapping speed reading technique would work. Starting with the core, it's the main idea, which is neuroplasticity. So you write that in the middle, and as I said, you're going to learn more about how to do it effectively later on the course. And once you do learn it, go back to this lecture and hear this lecture again, and you'll understand the mind mapping process better. After circling the main idea, which is neuroplasticity, you start branching. So as you're learning, you realize that neuroplasticity has an impact and an effect on different things. And this is where you start branching out the details. Neuroplasticity is in the middle, and then you have all the lines going up and other circles for sub-ideas, detailed ideas concerning the main idea. And you can add learning, you can add emotions, you can add experience, you can add memories. All the things that are involved in the process of neuroplasticity, what neuroplasticity would affect or would work on. Neurology can be one, neurostructures can be one, trauma, phobias can be one, psychology can be one. So now you have the main idea in the middle, which is neuroplasticity, and you have the sub-ideas around it. And now you do the same process for the sub-ideas. So now every sub-idea is a main idea, and you need sub-ideas for this sub-main idea. So for emotions, you will have positive emotions, negative emotions, control emotions, effect of emotions. For memories, you might have erase memory, you might have overcome memory, change memory. For learning, you might have the different systems, total immersion, linking and connecting, teach it, chunking technique. So the more you're reading through the book or through the content of whatever you're reading, you are mind mapping along. The book is about neuroplasticity. There are different chapters about emotions and learning and memory. And when you're reading the emotions chapter, you put all the sub details, which are the details of the sub detail that came from the core, which is neuroplasticity. I know right now this might be a bit complicated and you might think that you're not really understanding what's going on, but you will understand it way better as soon as you get to the mind mapping section.